The sun peeked through the sheer curtains, casting warm rays across the living room. Grace sat on the worn-out couch, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold long ago. Her eyes were fixed on the front door, a door that once opened with laughter, footsteps, and hugs. Now it stood silent, like the walls that had grown tired of waiting. Her son, Ethan, had changed. Ever since he got married, things were never the same. Grace could still remember the day he brought Emily home for the first time. Emily was beautiful, graceful in every way, but behind her polite smile, Grace had sensed something else. Distance. A quiet discomfort that grew with every passing day. Grace never said a word. She cooked for them, kept the house tidy, smiled at the right moments. She thought maybe with time things would get better, but they didn't. One evening, Ethan returned from work, his face tense. Grace noticed immediately. She placed a plate of his favorite roast on the table and asked softly, "Long day, son?" He sighed, not meeting her eyes. "Yeah, something like that." Emily appeared from the hallway, perfectly dressed as always, and said, "Ethan, we need to talk. Now." Grace stood still for a moment, sensing something heavy in the air. She quietly stepped back toward the kitchen, pretending to clean, but her heart beat faster. Minutes later, she heard voices, hushed at first, then louder. "Ethan, it's not working." "We need our own space," Emily said sharply. "Your mother, she's too involved in everything. I feel like I'm living in her house, not ours." Grace froze. The sponge slipped from her hand and fell into the sink. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had done everything for them, cooked their meals, ironed their clothes, even helped them save money by managing bills. Ethan's voice came next, quieter but firm. "Emily, please. She's my mother." Emily crossed her arms. "And I'm your wife. You have to choose what kind of life you want. We can't build a future when she's always here." The words pierced through Grace like knives. She stood there, trembling, her eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall. She wanted to walk out and say, "Don't worry, I'll go." But something inside her broke, not just her heart, but her sense of belonging. Later that night, Ethan sat beside her. His tone was distant, almost rehearsed. "Mom, Emily and I have been thinking, maybe you should take a little break. Go stay with Aunt Linda for a while. Just until we settle things." Grace looked at him, her only child, and tried to smile. "A break? Of course, sweetheart. If that's what you think is best." He nodded, relief flashing across his face. He hugged her briefly, but she felt nothing. No warmth, no connection. Just emptiness. That night, Grace packed a small suitcase. Just clothes, some photos, and the old watch her husband had given her before he died. She looked around the house, the walls she had painted herself, the curtains she had sewn, the table she had saved for months to buy. Everything in that house carried her memories, her sacrifices. But now she was walking away from it, from everything. As she closed the front door, she turned back one last time. She whispered to herself, "You'll understand one day, my son. You'll understand." Weeks passed. Grace stayed with her sister, but she never truly felt at home. Every morning, she'd make tea for two out of habit and then remember, Ethan wasn't there anymore. Sometimes she'd dial his number but hang up before it rang. She didn't want to disturb him. Maybe he was busy. Maybe he was happy. On the other side of town, Ethan was doing well. His career was thriving, his house looked perfect, and his wife was pleased. But deep down, something felt off. He didn't admit it, but the silence of the home bothered him. Grace's laughter, her humming in the kitchen, the way she'd ask, "Did you eat enough?" All of it was gone. Emily noticed his mood one night. "You've been quiet lately," she said, pouring herself wine. "I'm fine," Ethan replied, scrolling through his phone. "You're thinking about her again, aren't you?" She asked coldly. "Ethan, we talked about this. You can't let guilt control you." He didn't respond. He wanted to argue, but he didn't know what to say. He had convinced himself that he did the right thing, that it was better for everyone. But the truth haunted him. One rainy evening, as thunder rumbled outside, Ethan's old friend Michael came to visit. They hadn't seen each other in years. They talked about business, old memories, and college days. Then suddenly, Michael asked, "Hey, how's your mom?" "Haven't seen her in ages." Ethan hesitated. "She's fine, I guess." "Staying with my aunt?" Michael raised an eyebrow. "Your aunt?" That's strange. Last I heard, she was running your dad's old business after he passed. She worked day and night to save it, Ethan frowned. Wait, what? My mom never ran the business. My dad built it, Michael shook his head. No, man, your dad's partner wanted to shut it down, said it wasn't profitable anymore. Your mom took over. She managed the accounts, dealt with clients. She even sold her jewelry to keep the company afloat. Everyone in town knew it. Ethan's heart pounded. He couldn't believe it. That's not possible. She never said anything, Michael sighed. She wouldn't. That's how moms are, right? They don't brag about their pain. The words hit Ethan like a wave. He excused himself, went to his room, and sat there in the dark. His mind was filled with flashes. His mom's tired face, her quiet sacrifices, the nights she stayed up working while he slept peacefully. He realized how little he knew, how blind he had been. He pulled out an old photo album and saw a picture of himself as a child, sitting on his mom's lap. Her smile in that photo looked brighter than anything he'd seen in years. His throat tightened, his eyes burned. He whispered to himself, "What have I done?" That night, Grace sat by her window looking at the stars. She held her husband's photo in her hands and spoke softly. "I did my best, Richard. I gave him everything we had. But maybe love isn't enough anymore." A tear rolled down her cheek, but she wiped it away quickly. She had learned long ago that life doesn't stop for heartbreaks, but somewhere deep inside she still hoped. Maybe one day her son would come home. Maybe one day he'd remember who made him the man he became, and miles away, for the first time in years, Ethan cried. He finally understood that sometimes the people we take for granted are the ones who built everything we stand on. The next morning, Ethan woke up early, long before the sun had even stretched its arms across the sky. He hadn't slept all night. His mind was a storm of regret and confusion, the sound of Michael's words echoing like thunder in his head. "She sold her jewelry to save your father's business." He couldn't get that sentence out of his mind. He sat at the edge of his bed, his hands gripping his hair. The house felt too quiet, too cold. The woman who once filled it with laughter, warmth, and the smell of fresh bread was gone, and this emptiness was his doing. He knew that now. Emily stirred in bed, turning to him with a groggy voice. "Why are you up so early?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. He stood up, pacing the room, the floor creaking under his restless steps. Finally, he said, "I need to find her." Emily blinked, confused. "Find who?" "My mom," he said firmly. "I need to talk to her." She sat up, frowning. "Ethan, are you serious? After all this time?" "She's fine where she is. We talked about this before." He cut her off, his tone sharper than she'd ever heard. "You talked about it. I agreed because I was blind." He turned toward her, his eyes red with exhaustion. "But now I know what she did for us, for me. You have no idea how much she sacrificed." Emily crossed her arms, irritation flickering across her face. "You're being dramatic. Your mother made her choices. We have our own lives now." Ethan shook his head. "You don't understand. There wouldn't be a life for me to live if it weren't for her." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Emily turned away, her pride wounded, her expression stiff. "Do whatever you want, Ethan, but don't expect me to support this obsession." Ethan didn't reply. He grabbed his jacket and keys, his heart pounding with determination. As he stepped out into the cool morning air, a strange mix of guilt and hope surged through him. He didn't know where to start, but he knew he wouldn't stop until he found her. He drove to his Aunt Linda's house first. She opened the door, surprised to see him. "Ethan, it's been months." He smiled faintly. "Hi, Aunt Linda, is Mom here?" Her face softened, but she shook her head slowly. "No, dear. She stayed here for a while, but then she left. She said she didn't want to be a burden." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "Do you know where she went?" Linda hesitated. "She didn't say. She just packed up one morning, thanked me for everything, and left." She looked peaceful, though. Said she needed to find her own peace. Ethan's throat felt dry. He thanked his aunt and left, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the steering wheel. His mind was racing. Where could she have gone? He decided to drive through the town she used to visit often, the old neighborhood where he'd grown up. The streets looked smaller than he remembered, the houses older, the air heavier with nostalgia. He stopped by a small cafe where his mother used to work when times were hard. The owner, Mrs. Doyle, was still there, standing behind the counter with the same kind smile. "Ethan?" she said, surprised. "My goodness, it's been ages. How's Grace?" He forced a smile. "That's what I came to ask you. Do you know where she might be?" Mrs. Doyle's smile faded. She wiped her hands on her apron and sighed. "Oh, Ethan. She came by a few months ago." She looked tired, but still carried that same warm smile. "Said she was visiting some old friends. I think she mentioned Daniel and his wife. Remember them? He used to work for your father's company before starting his own." Ethan's eyes widened. "Daniel Collins?" "Yes, that's him," Mrs. Doyle nodded. "They live about 2 towns over now. They bought a small house near the lake." Ethan thanked her, his heart pounding as he rushed out of the cafe. For the first time in months, he felt a flicker of hope. The drive took nearly 2 hours. As he got closer to the small lakeside town, his memories flooded back. His mother's laughter, her gentle hand fixing his collar before school, her voice praying quietly each night for his future. When he finally reached the address Mrs. Doyle had mentioned, he parked by a modest home with white picket fences and a blooming garden. He hesitated before knocking. A woman opened the door. She looked kind, her eyes warm. "Can I help you?" "Hi, I'm looking for Grace Thompson," he said softly. Her eyes widened with recognition. "Grace, oh dear. Come in, please." Inside, the house smelled of freshly baked bread and lavender, just like his childhood home. The woman called out, "Grace! Someone's here to see you." Ethan's heart raced. Every second felt like a lifetime. Then from the hallway, he saw her, his mother. She looked older. Her hair grayer, her steps slower, but her eyes, those soft brown eyes, were still the same. She froze when she saw him, her hands trembling slightly. "Ethan?" she whispered, as if she didn't believe he was real. He nodded, his voice breaking. "Hi, Mom." For a moment, they just stared at each other, the silence heavy with everything left unsaid. Then Grace turned away, tears welling in her eyes. "Why are you here, Ethan?" He stepped closer, guilt written all over his face. "I came to say I'm sorry. I didn't know, Mom. I didn't know what you went through. What you did for us." Grace shook her head gently. "You shouldn't have come all this way. You have a family now. Go back to them." "I can't," he said, his voice trembling. "Not until you forgive me." Her lips quivered, her hands gripping the edge of the table for support. "Forgiveness isn't something you ask for with words, Ethan. It's something you earn." He lowered his head. "Then I'll earn it, however long it takes." The woman of the house, Daniel's wife, quietly stepped forward and placed a hand on Grace's shoulder. "Grace, dear, maybe you should talk to him. He's come a long way." Grace wiped her tears and nodded faintly. "All right," she said softly, her voice breaking. "Sit down, Ethan. Tell me why it took you so long." As he sat down, his eyes glistened. "Because I was stupid. I thought love was about convenience, not sacrifice. You gave everything for me, and I repaid you with silence. I let someone else's comfort matter more than your dignity." Grace looked at him, not with anger, but with sadness so deep it cut him to the core. "I never needed comfort, Ethan," she whispered. "I just needed my son." For the first time in years, Ethan cried openly, his shoulders shaking as he whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." Grace didn't move for a moment. Then slowly, she reached across the table and placed her wrinkled hand over his. Maybe this is the beginning," she said softly. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, and the lake shimmered in the fading sunlight. It felt like the world was finally breathing again. The next morning, Ethan woke up to the sound of birds outside the window. For a moment, he didn't remember where he was. Then he saw the familiar knitted blanket over him, the same kind his mother used to make when he was a child. The scent of tea drifted from the kitchen, and for the first time in years, he felt something close to peace. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes. Through the half-open door, he saw her, Grace, standing near the stove, wearing an old floral shawl and stirring a pot of tea. Daniel's wife, Maria, was beside her, helping with breakfast. They were laughing softly at something, their voices gentle like the morning breeze. Ethan watched silently for a while. The scene was so ordinary, yet so powerful. It reminded him of what home used to feel like, warmth, love, and simplicity. He stood up and walked toward them. Grace looked up, surprised to see him awake. "You're up early." she said softly. I couldn't really sleep, he replied, his voice still low with guilt. I kept thinking about everything you went through, and Grace interrupted gently, handing him a cup of tea. You should drink this before it gets cold. He hesitated, then took the cup with both hands. Mom, I mean it. I've been blind all these years. I thought I was giving you freedom, but I was only pushing you away. Grace smiled faintly, though her eyes carried deep sorrow. Ethan, sometimes children don't realize the weight their parents carry. That's just how life is. Maria placed a hand on Grace's shoulder. She never stopped thinking about you, you know, she said. Every evening she prays for you, for your wife, for your little boy. Ethan's throat tightened. You pray for us. After everything? Grace looked at him and simply said, A mother never stops praying for her child, no matter how far he goes. Ethan lowered his head, tears forming in his eyes. Later that day, Daniel returned from his workshop, a humble place in the backyard where he made wooden furniture. When he saw Ethan, he smiled warmly. So, you're Grace's boy, he said, shaking his hand firmly. She talks about you all the time. Ethan looked surprised. She does? Daniel nodded. Every time we sit by the lake in the evening, she tells us stories about how smart and kind you were as a child. You were her pride. Those words hit Ethan harder than any scolding could. He looked over at Grace, who was folding laundry quietly, pretending not to hear. He could tell she didn't want to make him uncomfortable, but her eyes glistened with emotion. That evening, Daniel invited Ethan to join them for dinner. The small table was filled with homemade food, lentils, bread, and vegetables. It wasn't luxurious, but it felt richer than any fancy meal Ethan had eaten in years. As they ate, Maria told stories about their children, how they were in school, how they were planning to start a small stationery shop with Daniel. Ethan listened quietly, occasionally glancing at his mother, who looked content among them. He realized something painful, yet beautiful. His mother had found a family in these kind people. They had given her respect, care, and companionship when he hadn't. After dinner, as the stars lit up the sky, Grace walked toward the lake behind the house. Ethan followed her. The water shimmered under the moonlight, and fireflies danced along the edge. She stopped near the wooden bench and sat down. This is my favorite spot, she said softly. It's peaceful here. I can think. Ethan sat beside her. For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the crickets and the soft waves hitting the shore. Mom, Ethan finally said, how did you survive all this? After Dad passed, He couldn't even finish the sentence. Grace sighed deeply. When your father died, I didn't know what to do. The business was drowning in debt. I didn't even know how to manage finances. But I learned, and slowly, painfully. I worked in small offices, saved every penny, and somehow I brought it back. She smiled faintly, lost in memories. You were so young then. I wanted you to have everything. Good education, a stable home. I never wanted you to feel the emptiness I did. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. And I threw all that away. I threw you away. Grace looked at him with a soft, forgiving smile. You were lost, Ethan. Sometimes people only learn the value of love when it's gone. He shook his head. No, Mom, I don't want to learn too late. I want to make it right. She looked at him curiously. And how will you do that? He took a deep breath. By bringing you home. You don't belong here, you belong with us. With me, with your grandson. Grace's eyes softened, but she shook her head gently. This is my home now. These people cared for me when no one else did. I can't just leave them. Ethan reached for her hand. I understand that. And I'll never forget what they did for you. But please, Mom, let me try again. Let me be the son you deserve. Tears rolled down Grace's cheeks. You already were once. Ethan wiped his eyes and whispered, Then let me be him again. She looked at him silently, her heart torn between the pain of the past and the hope of forgiveness. After a long pause, she said, Ethan, I'll think about it. He nodded. That's all I ask. Over the next few days, Ethan stayed there, helping Daniel with his workshop and spending time with Maria and their children. He played with their little boy, helped fix furniture, and shared meals with them. Grace watched quietly from a distance. She saw how he smiled again, genuinely, after so long. She saw the kindness in his eyes return, the boy she raised reappearing piece by piece. One evening, Daniel pulled Grace aside. He's a good man, Grace. He made mistakes, sure, but he's trying. Maybe it's time you gave him a chance. Grace sighed. I'm just afraid, Daniel. Afraid he'll forget again. Daniel smiled. Then remind him. That's what mothers do best. Grace chuckled softly, her heart warming. The next morning, as the sun rose over the lake, Ethan approached his mother again. Mom, he said gently, come with me today. There's someone I want you to see, Grace frowned. Who? He smiled faintly. You'll see, she reluctantly agreed. They drove in silence for an hour until they reached a familiar neighborhood. Ethan's home. Grace's hands trembled as she looked at it from the car window. I told you, Ethan, I don't want to go inside. He interrupted softly. You don't have to. Just wait here for a moment. He stepped out of the car and went inside. A few minutes later, he came back holding a little boy's hand. Grace's heart skipped a beat. Mom, Ethan said, his voice trembling. This is Aiden, your grandson. The little boy looked up shyly, then smiled. Grandma? Grace's tears broke free. She opened the car door and knelt down, wrapping her arms around the child. Oh, my sweet boy, she whispered, kissing his forehead over and over. Ethan stood behind them, tears streaming down his face. He had imagined this moment 100 times, but nothing could match its beauty. After a long hug, Grace looked up and saw Emily standing by the gate, her eyes red. She walked over slowly. Mrs. Thompson, Emily said softly, guilt in her voice. I was wrong. I didn't understand your worth. Please forgive me. Grace hesitated for a moment, then reached out and hugged her too. It's not about who was wrong, dear. It's about what we learn. Emily nodded, crying. Ethan smiled, watching his mother hold both his wife and son. For the first time in years, everything felt whole again. Grace looked at her son and said, All right, Ethan. Let's go home. And as the car drove away, the sun bathed the road in golden light, a new beginning after years of silence. For months, Ethan's days felt longer than they should. Nights were even worse. Every time he closed his eyes, his mother's face appeared, sometimes smiling, sometimes silent, but always fading away before he could say the words he should have said long ago. I'm sorry, Mom. He had searched everywhere. Old neighbors, church directories, hospitals, even nursing homes. No one seemed to know where she had gone. It was as if she had vanished, leaving nothing but guilt behind. His wife Clara watched him quietly, never saying much, but guilt sat heavy on her heart too. She knew she had played her part in driving that old woman away. One evening, while Ethan sat in his study, exhausted from another day of failed searching, there was a soft knock on the door. Come in, he murmured. It was his father's old business partner. Mr. Reynolds, an older man with kind eyes and a slow voice. Ethan hadn't seen him in years. I heard you've been looking for your mother, Reynolds said gently. I think it's time you know the truth, son, Ethan frowned. Truth? What truth? Reynolds sighed, sitting down across from him. You've always believed that your father built everything. The business, the house, your future. But that's not the full story. After your father died, the company was nearly gone. Your mother was the one who rebuilt it. Ethan's breath caught. What? She worked day and night, Reynolds continued. She sold her jewelry, took loans, and even took up small jobs. Things she never told you. The reason you could go to college, the reason this house even exists, is because she refused to give up. Ethan's chest tightened. He remembered those nights when he'd hear her moving around after midnight, thinking she couldn't sleep. He thought it was grief. He never realized she was working, calculating, trying to keep everything from falling apart. Your mother saved this family, Reynolds said, standing up slowly. And when she asked you to take care of the company, she wasn't being controlling. She was trying to hand you her life's work. The words hit like a storm. Ethan sat frozen, his mind spinning through memories, his mother's tired eyes, her gentle smile, her trembling hands when she signed papers he never bothered to look at. He pressed his palms to his face and whispered, What have I done? Reynolds placed a hand on his shoulder. You can still make it right, son. Go find her before it's too late. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. Guilt tore through him like fire. He looked at the family photo on his desk, his mother, standing proudly behind him, her hand on his shoulder. The picture felt different now, almost mocking. By morning, he had made up his mind. He wasn't going to stop until he found her. Weeks turned into months again. Every lead ended in disappointment, until one morning, a call came from an unknown number. "Mr. Ethan Miller?" A woman's voice said. "You've been asking around about your mother, Margaret?" Ethan's heart jumped. "Yes, yes. Do you know where she is?" The woman paused. "I think you should come see for yourself." The small town was 3 hours away. Ethan drove faster than he should, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. His wife, Clara, sat beside him silently, her eyes red. In the back seat, their little son slept, clutching a small teddy bear. When they reached the modest neighborhood, a middle-aged man and woman stood outside a small bakery. They waved as he parked. "You must be Ethan," the man said kindly. "I'm Daniel, and this is my wife, Lucy." They led him inside, where the smell of fresh bread filled the air. Daniel poured him tea while Lucy smiled gently. "She's been living with us," Lucy said softly. "Your mother?" Ethan's eyes widened. "What? Here?" Lucy nodded. "She helped us once, years ago. My husband lost his job and wanted to start his own bakery. No one believed in him, but your mother did. She lent him money, without any papers, without any conditions. Just faith," Daniel's voice broke slightly. "She told me, when life gives you nothing, hard work gives you everything. I never forgot that." Ethan sat speechless, his throat closing up. "She came here last year," Lucy continued. "She didn't have anywhere to go, and we couldn't let her live alone. She's been like a mother to our kids. She cooks, tells stories, helps at the bakery. Everyone loves her here." Tears burned behind Ethan's eyes. His mother had lost everything, her home, her son, but she had found peace and kindness once again. "Can I see her?" he whispered. Lucy smiled. "She's out back hanging laundry. Go." Ethan stepped outside into the backyard. The sun was low, painting the sky with gold. There she was, his mother, standing beside a clothesline, her gray hair tied back, her hands gently folding a white sheet. For a moment, he couldn't move. His knees felt weak. She looked so much older, but somehow still so graceful. "Mom," he whispered, voice trembling. She turned slowly. Her eyes widened, and the sheet fell from her hands. "Ethan?" He walked closer, words stuck in his throat. "Mom, I've been looking for you," her voice shook. "Why now, Ethan?" He dropped to his knees in front of her, tears streaming down his face. "Because I was wrong. I didn't know what you did for me, for us. I thought I built everything, but it was you. I threw you out of your own home. Mom, please, forgive me." She stared at him for a long moment, her lips trembling. Then slowly she knelt too, cupping his face with both hands. "My son," she whispered. "You finally came." He pressed his forehead against her palms, sobbing. Behind them, Lucy and Daniel stood quietly in the doorway, tears in their eyes. The moment was too sacred to disturb. After a while, Margaret helped Ethan stand. "You don't need to say anything more," she said softly. "You're my son. A mother forgives before her child even apologizes." Ethan wiped his tears. "I want you to come home." She shook her head gently. "This is my home now. These people took me in when no one else did. They're like my family." Ethan turned back toward the car, desperation in his eyes. "Wait here." Moments later, he returned, this time holding his little son in his arms. "Mom," he said, voice breaking, "someone wants to meet you." The old woman's eyes filled with tears as she saw the small boy reaching out toward her. She dropped to her knees again and hugged him tightly, kissing his cheeks over and over. "My sweet boy," she whispered. "You have your father's eyes." Clara walked up next, eyes red with regret. She didn't say a word, just folded her hands together and bowed her head. Margaret understood. She placed a trembling hand on Clara's cheek. "No more tears," she said softly. "Family isn't about mistakes. It's about coming back." That evening, they all sat together at the small bakery table, sharing tea and laughter that had been missing for years. Margaret looked around. The warm light, the smell of bread, her son's smile, her grandson's laughter, and for the first time in a long while, her heart felt full again. Sometimes, she thought, life doesn't take you back to where you were. It takes you to where you're meant to be. The next morning, Ethan woke up early. He hadn't slept much. His mind kept replaying the moment he'd seen his mother again. it still didn't feel real. For the first time in a long time, he'd cried like a child, and yet those tears felt cleansing, like rain after a long drought. He quietly stepped out of the small guest room. The air was filled with the smell of freshly baked bread and the faint sound of laughter. When he walked into the kitchen, his mother was there, wearing a light apron, rolling dough while Daniel's kids chattered beside her. She looked happy. For a few seconds, he just stood in the doorway watching. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen her smile like that. When she noticed him, she smiled wider. "You're up early," he nodded, his voice rough. "Couldn't sleep." She gestured toward the chair. "Sit, breakfast will be ready soon." He obeyed silently, sitting down like a boy again, watching her move around the kitchen. Every gesture was gentle, steady, the same way she used to make his lunches before school. Lucy placed a cup of tea before him. "She's been up since 5, she said softly. "Said she couldn't let you leave without breakfast." Ethan's throat tightened. "She still thinks of everything." Margaret turned, smiling faintly. Mothers never stop worrying. They ate together, laughter occasionally filling the small kitchen. Ethan's son sat on his grandmother's lap, feeding her small bites of bread. For a moment, it almost felt like all those broken years never existed. When breakfast was over, Ethan followed his mother outside to the garden behind the house. She was watering the flowers, her hands steady despite her age. The sun fell softly across her face. "Mom," he said quietly, walking closer, "I don't deserve your forgiveness." She didn't turn around. "You don't need to deserve it, Ethan. You're my son." "That's enough. But I threw you out," he whispered. "I said things I can't even repeat. I let my wife disrespect you. I let my pride destroy everything you built." Margaret sighed, lowering the watering can. "You were angry, misled, and maybe I was too soft. I didn't teach you enough about gratitude." He shook his head, stepping closer. "No, you taught me everything. I just never listened." There was silence between them, filled only by the soft rustle of wind through the garden. Then Margaret looked at him, her eyes kind but tired. "I was hurt, Ethan," she admitted. "Not because you sent me away, but because I thought I failed you. I spent my whole life making sure you never lacked anything. I forgot that sometimes a child needs lessons more than comfort." Her voice trembled slightly, but her face stayed calm. "When you turned me out, I told myself I'd raised a stranger. But when I saw you kneeling yesterday, crying like you used to when you fell off your bike, I realized you were still my little boy somewhere inside." Ethan covered his face, tears slipping between his fingers. "I've wasted so much time." Margaret reached out and touched his hand. "Then stop wasting more. Start again." That afternoon, Ethan helped Daniel at the bakery. He insisted on doing the heavy lifting, something he hadn't done in years. It felt strange but good, grounding. When the bakery closed, Daniel sat beside him. "You know," he said, "your mother never spoke badly of you, not once. Even when she first came here crying some nights, she'd just say, 'My son's lost, but he'll find his way back.'" Ethan's eyes burned. "She said that?" Daniel nodded. "Every single time. You're lucky, Ethan. Not every man gets a love that unconditional." Ethan looked through the bakery window, where his mother sat with Lucy and the children. She was telling a story, her hands moving animatedly, laughter spilling from the kids. He realized that no amount of money, no mansion, no success could ever compare to this, a simple moment of love. That evening, when the sun began to set, Ethan asked his mother to walk with him. They strolled down a quiet road behind the bakery, where fields stretched endlessly, the horizon glowing orange and pink. "I remember when Dad used to take us out like this," Ethan said softly. "You'd hold his arm, and I'd walk behind you pretending to be grown up." Margaret chuckled faintly. "You used to complain about your shoes hurting," he smiled. "I'd do anything to go back to those days." She looked at him, her eyes soft. "You don't need to go back, Ethan. You just need to live better now." They stopped near a small wooden bench. Margaret sat down, gazing at the sky. "You know," she said quietly, "when your father died, I didn't know how to survive. I had no idea how to run his business, how to pay the bills, how to raise you alone. But every time I wanted to give up, I'd look at you and think, he deserves a future." She looked at her hands, now wrinkled and veined. "That's what kept me alive." Ethan sat beside her, his voice breaking. And I destroyed that future the day I let you walk away. Margaret turned toward him, her eyes glistening. No, my son. You made a mistake. Everyone does. What matters is that you came back. He took her hand and held it tightly. You'll come home, right? I fixed the house. It's yours. It always was. She smiled, but her eyes carried hesitation. Home isn't just a place, Ethan. It's where you're loved. These people took me in when I had nothing. They gave me warmth when I'd lost everything. I know, he said softly. That's why I want them to come with us. To visit. To see where you belong. Margaret chuckled. You think the world revolves around you again? He smiled, wiping a tear. No, Mom, it revolves around you. She laughed through her tears, shaking her head. You haven't changed much. Later that night, Margaret tucked her grandson into bed. The boy looked up at her with sleepy eyes and whispered, Grandma, will you come live with us? Her heart clenched. Would you like that? He nodded eagerly. Mom said you make the best pancakes. She laughed softly. I'll make you some in the morning, okay? The boy grinned and closed his eyes, holding her hand until he drifted to sleep. As she stood there watching him, a thought crossed her mind. Maybe this was her second chance. Not just for Ethan, but for herself. When she stepped into the living room, Ethan and Clara were waiting. Clara's eyes were full of tears. Mrs. Miller, she said softly, I don't deserve your forgiveness either. I let my pride and insecurity ruin everything. But I promise, if you give us another chance, I'll never let you feel unwanted again. Margaret walked up to her, placing a hand on her cheek. Forgiveness isn't something to earn, dear. It's something to share. Clara broke down crying, and Margaret embraced her gently. Ethan watched them, his heart heavier and lighter all at once. That night, before going to bed, Margaret stood by the window. The moonlight fell across her face. She whispered a silent prayer, not for wealth or comfort, but for peace. She had spent so many years fighting, protecting, forgiving. And now, finally, she felt seen. Tomorrow, she would make her decision. The next morning, sunlight filtered softly through the curtains of Daniel and Lucy's home. The world outside was calm. Birds sang. The air smelled of fresh bread and blooming flowers. Margaret stood by the window watching the children play in the yard. A quiet smile touched her lips. She felt something she hadn't felt in years, peace. Behind her, Ethan entered the room, holding 2 cups of tea. He placed one beside her. Good morning, Mom. She nodded, still looking outside. Good morning, son. They stood together in silence for a while, both knowing that soon a decision had to be made. Ethan broke the silence first. We're leaving this evening, he said gently. I'd like you to come home with us. Margaret turned toward him. Ethan, I've built a small life here. It's quiet, simple. I don't want to disturb it. He stepped closer. You won't disturb anything. It's your home, Mom. It's always been yours. I want you back, not as someone to take care of us, but as the heart of our family. Her eyes softened. You mean that? He nodded firmly. I do. I've rebuilt the house, but it feels empty without you. Even my son, he asks about you every night. Margaret's gaze drifted toward the garden again. Children always see truth before adults do, she murmured. He smiled faintly. Maybe it's time I started seeing like him. Later that afternoon, the whole house gathered in the living room. Lucy sat with the kids while Daniel poured tea for everyone. The air felt bittersweet, like something precious was ending and beginning at the same time. Margaret cleared her throat softly. Daniel, Lucy, you've been more than kind to me. You gave me shelter, respect, and love when I had nothing. I can never repay that. Daniel smiled warmly. You don't need to repay us, Mrs. Miller. You already did years ago, when you helped me start my bakery. You gave me a future. We only gave you what you once gave us. Tears filled her eyes. Still, thank you. You became my family when my own had forgotten me. Ethan's voice trembled. And now that your family has found you again, we'll never forget what you did for her. Daniel reached out his hand. Promise me one thing, you'll visit us often. The bakery won't be the same without your advice. Margaret smiled through her tears. I promise. A few hours later, the car was ready. Ethan loaded the bags while Lucy hugged Margaret tightly. Take care of yourself, Lucy whispered. And don't stop making that lemon pie. Daniel's still trying to copy your recipe. Margaret laughed softly. He'll never get it right without my secret ingredient. What's that? Lucy asked, smiling. Love, Margaret said simply. Then she hugged Daniel and the children one last time. The little girl clung to her skirt, crying. Grandma, don't go. Margaret knelt down and kissed her forehead. I'll visit soon, sweetheart. Be good, okay? Ethan watched, humbled. Every goodbye reminded him how deeply his mother had touched others' lives, something he had never truly appreciated before. As the car drove away, Margaret looked out the window at the bakery fading into the distance. She whispered a silent prayer for the kind souls who had sheltered her. Ethan glanced at her in the rearview mirror. You okay, Mom? She smiled faintly. Yes, Ethan, for the first time in a long while. I am. When they reached the city, the evening sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. As the car turned into the old neighborhood, Margaret's heart beat faster. She hadn't seen this street in years. The old oak tree still stood near the gate, the same one under which Ethan used to play as a boy. The house, once broken and lonely, now looked alive again. Fresh paint, clean windows, flowers blooming near the porch. Ethan helped her out of the car, his voice trembling. Welcome home, Mom. For a long moment, she just stood there, her eyes filling with tears. Every memory, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every tear she'd shed, all came rushing back. She stepped forward, touching the wall gently, as if to confirm it was real. It's beautiful, she whispered. Ethan's son ran ahead, opening the door. Grandma, come in. Inside, the house smelled of fresh lilies, her favorite. The dining table was set, candles lit. Clara stood near the kitchen, her eyes red from crying. When Margaret saw her, she paused. Clara hesitated for a second before walking forward and falling to her knees. I don't deserve your forgiveness, Clara said, her voice shaking. But please, give me a chance to make things right. I promise I'll love you like my own mother. Margaret gently bent down and lifted her up. You already are my daughter. Clara burst into tears and hugged her tightly. Ethan's eyes filled again. But this time, they weren't tears of guilt, but relief. Later that night after dinner, the family sat together in the living room. Margaret held her grandson in her arms as he slept. Ethan looked at her. Mom, there's something I want to show you. He handed her an envelope. Inside were legal papers, the house, the business, everything, in her name. Margaret's eyes widened. Ethan, what is this? He smiled softly. It was always yours, Mom. You built it. I just forgot who really earned it. Her hands trembled as she looked at him. You don't need to do this. I do, he said. Because I want to live the rest of my life knowing I gave back at least a little of what you gave me. She wiped her tears. You've already given me more than I ever asked for, Ethan. You came home. As the night deepened, the house grew quiet. Ethan watched from the doorway as his mother tucked his son into bed. She hummed a soft lullaby, the same one she used to sing to him decades ago. Something inside him healed in that moment. When she finished, she looked back at him and smiled. See? Still remember the tune? He nodded, whispering, I never forgot it. I just forgot how it felt. Margaret placed a hand on his cheek. Then promise me, Ethan, don't let pride ever blind you again. Love is the only wealth that grows when you give it away. He nodded, his voice cracking. I promise, Mom. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains again, just like that first morning she'd left home years ago. But this time she wasn't leaving. She was home, Clara made breakfast, Ethan set the table, and laughter filled the house once more. Margaret looked around, her family together again, and whispered to herself, some debts are never repaid with money. Only with love. She looked at her son, her daughter-in-law, and her grandson, and for the first time in many, many years, she felt whole,